The keyboard's very loud. Good evening, comrades. Thank you very much for joining us. Tonight we got what was planned as an election hustings, which we had to adjust slightly because there has been let's put it like that, a lack of replies, unfortunately. TASC, the Socialist Party's electoral front, has not replied, although we sent various emails to various people, collective, which Jeremy Corbyn might or might not get involved in after the elections, also not replied, unfortunately. Same goes for Socialist Appeal, which never replied to our letter on their transformation to the Revolutionary Communist Party either, which kind of answers perhaps our question as to what kind of party it was becoming. Maybe we're too small, maybe we're too left-wing, maybe we're too critical, perhaps we're all of those things. I'm afraid, I don't think, from my point of view, that does not bode well for the future of many of these organizations, unless we're prepared to debate openly like we're trying to do tonight, unless we're prepared to sometimes be in a minority, unless we're prepared to accept that not everybody agrees with us. I fear the kind of organizations we continue to build are sects, not the democratic political party that we need. I'm very pleased that we have two candidates who have agreed to discuss tonight with each other and with the audience and answer questions from the floor. We will soon be joined by Chris Williamson, who's still out canvassing and will be joining us by 8 p.m. the latest. So we're starting tonight with Caitriona Rylance, who's a candidate for Communist Future in Manchester. Caitriona, why should we, or socialists in Manchester more precisely, vote for you?
Thank you very much for inviting me along again. Just let me pull my notes up. So I'm speaking this evening to represent Communist Future, which is a project that is based in Manchester that we've been working on for about a year. I've spoke on here previously a few months ago about the electoral tactic and how and why communists make use of it. So that obviously frames a lot of what I will discuss tonight. Obviously, there are wider left approaches to elections beyond the approaches and background that communists would come from in relation to this. And some of that might be represented later in what Chris Williamson will say for the Workers' Party, or maybe what other people might kind of chip in through the discussions. So obviously, it'd be good to pull out some of those differences, which they do frame a lot of what I'll talk about. Now. But yeah, this idea of participating in elections as being, for communists, a tactic that we can make use of is really the framing of our project, Communist Future, in the sense that elections are not seen as the only or the primary mechanism by which we seek transformative change in society. And as I say, that might obviously underpin a lot of the differences between our project, Communist Future, and other left electoral initiatives, as Tina mentioned, some of the ones that were also invited along. I'll try not to repeat too much of what I said previously. But as I say, obviously, a lot of those same issues around the electoral tactic and why we make use of the electoral tactic will come out again in what I'm discussing. I also spoke last time a little bit about our project, which I will just quickly recap on as well before I go into the main discussion. So we're a project based in Manchester, which we've been working on for about a year. And we've begun this, or set out doing this with the aim to bring together communists from different backgrounds locally, those who might be in groups or not in groups, as a project of common work to try to make a communist political intervention that breaks us out into the public sphere, breaks that politics out into the public sphere. I've read a lot of kind of interesting stuff. Depending on what you follow, you might be familiar with some of it, but especially things from that Notes from Below have put out recently about the challenges that communists face in that post-Corbyn era, about how we organise as communists, about how we connect together, maybe work that we're doing in the community, work that we're doing in our unions, often in that post-Corbyn era, we've kind of retreated into that work and become sort of communists in our perspectives and our beliefs, and it guides our work to some degree, but we find that difficulty of bringing that out into the open, of organising as communists in our unions, as communists in our community. And part of that political intervention that we've tried to kind of have at the centre of what we're doing locally is to have that space to try and crack those politics out into the public sphere, challenging ourselves to go beyond the spaces of familiarity and comfort and maybe the niche in society that communists tend to occupy. Again, as part of those sort of thinking about what it means to be a communist or a socialist in that post-Corbyn era, it's often something that maybe we might talk about among friends or in reading groups or in the pub, but there's a real disconnect between those spaces. And obviously, as I kind of will pull out later on, for those of us who focus on the importance and the kind of fundamental need for a communist party in society, the type that Tina described, a democratic mass communist party, for those of us who recognise the need for it, it's precisely exposed to us in that disconnect between the politics that we might hold and the work that we do in the unions, in our communities, and the difficulty of bringing those together. So part of what we're doing is also to try and raise that importance of the need for party and organisation as well. But as I say, I'll go into that further later on. And another kind of aspect of what we're trying to do is also to cohere together communists locally and to try to carve out a space for communist politics in the city. Standing in the election is kind of one way that we're looking to do that, but there's many other ways that hopefully after things have calmed down a little bit after the election, we can start to think about other things and other work that we can do as part of that. And obviously through this to try and build our own experience and skills through door knocking, through campaigning, building those skills in terms of intervening and communicating communist politics more widely. So as part of our project, we're standing one candidate. So I'm going to be the candidate in the ward, Manchester Central. As I say, we're just standing one candidate this time. And we're starting out and hoping to gain, as I say, those skills and experience from this, drawing our work together more closely with others in the area, and building from there going forward. So just giving a kind of recap on it, obviously, because it's not a national project, it might not be something people are familiar with. So just thought I'd give a little bit of context on that. Okay, so obviously the question of discussion tonight is why you should vote for us. Very few of you will have the opportunity to vote for us, based on where you live in. But a lot of the questions that are being raised and the points maybe that I'm putting forward here would apply to other communist candidates as well. So those of you who have the opportunity to vote for a communist candidate of other organisations, other projects, then those same kind of arguments would probably apply in this sense. Okay, so I'll begin first of all in the negative sense in terms of why not vote for others. Why did we see the point of or purpose of fielding a communist candidate in this election rather than voting for or supporting existing initiatives? We're a small intervention at this stage, so it makes sense to begin, I think, first by looking at it in that negative sense. So there's two questions to look at. Why not a vote for Labour, and why not other electoral initiatives that Tina's mentioned from the left? Obviously, tried to kind of cover things that I think might be questions people have or questions that people are thinking about themselves in their own minds and might be of interest to people. But obviously anything that isn't covered, it'd be good if people bring it up as questions or points and we can pull that out further. So I tried to kind of pitch it in terms of where I think, you know, people's own thinking might be and own questions might be, but yeah, definitely would be interested to hear what people are thinking and the questions people might have more widely on this. Okay, so first of all, why stand against Labour? Why not vote for Labour in our constituency? So people on the left will have many reasons, of course, for continuing to vote Labour. Primarily, the impulse or feeling that a lot of people on the left have is that we just need to get the Tories out. So that's kind of a natural impulse, even if people don't like Starmer and don't like anything that the Labour Party represents. And I appreciate that feeling, definitely. I mean, you know, of course, but I also don't know what it means in the context under Starmer, in the sense that the Labour Party are probably going to be obviously a more efficient manager of the capitalist system in this period, particularly if they returned with a substantial majority. But do they represent an alternative to the Tories or a vision of change in any way, in any real way? And I think that's one of the kind of important questions that we face in this period, is that there is a sense that there is no alternative and that there is no other option, and that we simply resign ourselves to what's in front of us, and that the best that we can hope for is, you know, is the government represented by Starmer. I don't think, you know, and I'm sure many people would agree, even if the feeling or the impulse is in that direction. But yeah, as I say, hopefully we can kind of draw that out through the discussions. There's also the traditional argument, and maybe there's a lot of the same implications coming out of it, for why those on the left would vote Labour. And that's the idea of the Labour Party being a bourgeois workers' party, which means in kind of Marxist terms that politically it remains wedded to the capitalist system and variously presents an expression of a compromise for workers' interests within this. The reason we will continue to see it as being important, though, is not because it holds this or that political principle, but because it remains in some way a political organisation of the working class. It has a connection to the unions, and it remains that expression of organisation for the working class. And so it therefore remains important for us to engage with or vote for. So that would be kind of one of the substantial arguments that people on the left would put forward in terms of why we should continue to vote Labour. What I think is important, and it's not kind of, as I said, disconnected from the idea of that feeling of resignation and that there is no alternative, that there is no real option for change. And what I think is important in this period, when we think about the question of voting Labour, it's not one of principle. The Labour Party takes unprincipled positions on many things like Gaza, so on, but it's not because of those unprincipled positions that I would say not voting Labour, but instead it's thinking about the context that we're in terms of the effect on political consciousness. When Starmer is returned with, you know, potentially a substantial majority, what effect will that have on the political consciousness of people in general, but the political consciousness of the working class as well? I think in many kind of ways of looking at it, the experience of Starmer in disciplining the left within the Labour Party, in kind of pushing out anybody who represented, you know, the slightest kind of hope for a different society, hope for socialism or whatever it might be, in pushing that out and in disciplining the left. When Keir Starmer is returned with a large majority, that almost legitimises that process, which then I think would serve as a pacifying effect on political consciousness. Oh, we were right all along. We were wrong to hope for anything different. We'll never get anywhere with that. And that kind of impact on political consciousness, I think, is significant to contend with in what it represents for the idea of an alternative, the idea of change or socialism in even loose terms. And that effect on political consciousness is something that also needs to be considered when we think about voting for the Labour Party. And I think without consideration of this context, the fall back into the routine of voting Labour can become a schema, and the effects of that consciousness can be lost in our consideration. So I think that is a fundamental thing. When we've kind of been developing our project, one of the things that we've tried to push forward and try to put at the fore of what we're doing is pushing against that idea that there is no alternative, pushing to the fore the idea of communism as that alternative in society, and trying to break that pacification of our that's closing in of our political horizons that resigns us to the system and resigns us to what's in front of us. So those are some of the kind of main points I thought to raise around it. But obviously, as I say, if people pull out more in the discussions around the vote for Labour, I think that would be very valuable. Okay, why not other broadly left electoral initiatives also? So there are, for example, Transform, Collective, others in that vein. And each probably has its own kind of things that would be valuable to discuss. But I will focus slightly more here on the Workers' Party, given that in Manchester Central, we are standing against a Workers' Party candidate. And obviously, given that Chris Williamson is also speaking for the Workers' Party this evening, I want to apologise for putting forward these critical points in his absence, because obviously he won't be joining till later on. I wasn't aware of that when I kind of put it together. Obviously, it's preferable if you can present those criticisms openly and as a basis for discussion. But maybe if there's people who are listening who are supportive, then they might be able to pick up and respond to some of these points. Yeah, okay. So I want to say very clearly, first of all, from my own perspective, that I think there is an absolute logic and legitimate reason for voting for them, voting for different electoral initiatives, but specifically for the Workers' Party in this context. And I understand why people will do that. They clearly and fundamentally raise the issue of Palestine, which is fundamental in this period. And they also raise important arguments around imperialism and NATO, which are also significant. Having representatives from the Workers' Party in Parliament would provide a clear platform to challenge the government on these issues. That would create publicity in the media and would expose more people to those arguments, and that absolutely has value. So the arguments, there are clear arguments on that side, which I certainly wouldn't seek to underplay. But for those of us who see revolutionary change in society as being fundamental, then there are important points underpinning these types of initiatives, which I think need to be contended with. And as I say, hopefully some of this will be responded to or drawn out in the discussions. So the fundamental critique of these projects from my perspective, or from a communist perspective more broadly, the critique of these projects to, that the left should orientate itself towards building electoral initiatives and electoral formations, is the idea of socialism from below versus socialism from above. So it's the question of upon what basis do we form parties and what purpose do they serve? The idea of socialism from above is the idea that we can vote for a party and they will get into government and they will enact these things for us. Obviously, it can take, socialism from above can take other forms as well, but it's the idea that it's something that will be done on our behalf, that we will take a more passive role in transformation or change, and that it doesn't require our self-organisation. It doesn't require us to self-organise as the working class in order to push for and develop transformative change. Whereas the idea of socialism from below is that self-organisation of the working class, that independent self-organisation of the working class, is the fundamental tool which will transform society as a whole. And that difference is important in these electoral initiatives. Obviously, as I kind of tried to pull out last time talking about the electoral tactic, it's somewhat of a danger for any of us who participate in elections, because immediately when you begin to participate in elections, there's the automatic assumption that you therefore believe this to be the primary expression of how change will happen in society. So it's something that we all contend with, but I think in terms of analysing the basis of how we see agency in transformative change, when we look at these electoral initiatives like Transform, like the Workers' Party, they're not in many senses an expression of socialism from below. They're not an expression of the self-organisation of the working class, but they're an expression of socialism or progressive reforms that will be handed to or done on behalf of the working class. So this is the position from which communists generally would criticise electoral initiatives like the Workers' Party, I think. Obviously, there's many other criticisms people might want to bring up in terms of the political expression, the political basis of these also. But it's criticism of the vision of change, both, as I say, in terms of the politics that are expressed, but also in terms of the strategy that is contained within it about how transformative change might happen, about who are the agents of that change and what are the mechanisms of that change. So will it be delivered to us by someone taking power on our behalf, by organisations or parties taking power, or is it something that we will need to organise together for, in which case the party itself would be the space and the vehicle within which we organise together to take power collectively. So it's a very different vision of the way that we see agency, revolutionary strategy, and transformative change in society. Obviously, as I say, there are also and inseparably, so there are political criticisms that we can also put forward that relate to that idea of how we see change in society and what even that change might be that we recognise. I think obviously socialism as an idea is raised by a lot of Workers' Party candidates. But there are also many, many more that will not talk about socialism or capitalism or class, despite the name of the initiative. And I think if we think about the function of engaging in elections, obviously there might be many different functions, but if one of those is in terms of political consciousness, education, propagandizing, the political content that's being advanced there for those of us on the left, it's not the expression of politics that many of us would actually hold. There is little discussion of socialism or capitalism, and it is more a communication of a project of fairness and equality. And politically, obviously that might, for a lot of us feel a great deal better than what we're faced with right now. But is that our political project? And I think that's the fundamental question. For some in the Workers' Party, the project of fairness and equality might summarise the politics, but for some in that project, the politics will be so much more than that. And I think that's kind of the question that we're dealing with a lot of the time, is upon what political basis do we cohere ourselves? Do we express ourselves? Is it on the basis of talking and openly expressing the ideas of socialism, communism, open discussion of class struggle and capitalism? Is that the basis upon which we organise ourselves? Or is it more of a defensive strategy of trying to think about what's feasible or what's appealing in this current period? Okay, just let me... Yeah. Yeah, and I think there's a few points. Obviously, I don't want to kind of go too much on it if Chris isn't here to directly respond to it. But I think, some of the stuff around the state, that's expressed in the Workers' Party manifesto is also important to contend with. There are, as I say, very significant arguments that will be expressed through the Workers' Party campaigning that will be really important around imperialism, Palestine, NATO, etc. But at the same time, there are political policies or expressions that are strengthening towards the state. So it's that combination of the two, and that doesn't contend directly with the role that the state has as deeply wedded to imperialism as well. So if we want to talk about challenging imperialism, if we want to talk about challenging the power of the capitalist class, for those Workers' Party candidates who might talk in those terms, it's difficult to see how that fits together with policies that empower the police or strengthen immigration controls. Those policies that strengthen the infrastructure of the state itself, how that fits together with policies that themselves or ideas themselves, such as challenging imperialism, that require also challenging the capitalist state. But yeah, hopefully people can maybe unpick and develop some of that in the discussion. Okay, so sort of, I suppose, summarising then the important questions that I think are in front of us fundamentally when we look at engaging in electoral politics is what the political basis is upon which we mobilise, and interrelated with that, strategically, how we envision transformative change occurring and who we see as delivering it and how. And those expressions influence and shape the type of interventions we make. And that's probably the fundamental difference, I think, that we would see between electoral initiatives like the Workers' Party, Transform and others, Collective, etc., and those candidates who are standing as communists on communist politics. For communists, as I say, engaging in the electoral tactic does bring these issues to contend with, and a lot of the discussions we've had with people locally is kind of concerns, I suppose, around that, because it suggests or puts out the idea that we would see electoral politics as the kind of primary field in which communists should organise, or as being the means by which communism can be achieved, or the primary focus of our work. So obviously it does bring those challenges, and that is something that that as I kind of previously tried to discuss, that is why it is so central, I think, to try and strongly emphasise in any interventions that we're making, both class struggle as being the motor of transformative change, and also the transformative vision of society, the communist future that we look towards in everything that we do, keeping those two things central in our political expressions. Okay, so finally, just thinking a little bit more positively about the argument for why you should vote for communist candidates, or why you should vote for Communist Future if you're in Manchester Central. Obviously, we're working at a small scale and local scale, and we're trying to cohere together communist forces locally, raising a communist platform and trying to carve out that space in the public sphere for a communist presence, trying to build communist consciousness. But obviously, we're aware of the limits within that. It's a local project, and that's absolutely not sufficient in terms of what we face in this period. what we need is a national initiative, a national project. But what we would see for ourselves locally is that this can provide the basis from which to kind of prepare some of that ground. So doing the groundwork in cohering communists together locally, alongside work to try to cohere things together nationally, so that when we were able to make moves towards national initiatives, we have that basis of communist politics. We have that culture of discussion, of open exchange locally that would allow us to kind of feed into and provide the basis for establishing that locally. So obviously I'm talking here about a communist party when we're thinking about that as a national initiative. And as I say, as I kind of said at the start, the electoral tactic is only one part of the work that can be done to create that communist presence within the public sphere. And obviously, when things have calmed down a little bit after the election, it will be good, for us locally to think about some of the other things that we can do to create that open public culture of communist politics in the city. So essentially, in standing as a communist candidate and making a communist intervention, we are asking for a degree, that might be the politics that a lot of us hold, but because we're in a period of constant crisis, I think it's understandable in some ways that a lot of us become very used to putting our own politics to one side. We face economic crisis, we face cuts, we face war, we face all of these different things occurring, and we become very used to putting our own politics to one side. We will support this group. They're not our politics, they're not the political expression of the change that we think needs to occur in society, but we just need to deal with this thing right now. We've become in a state of constant crisis and emergency, and we become very used to suspending or putting our own politics to one side. We become almost in a constant state of exception where we sort of take on the strategy or the approach that we will just focus on this thing right now, and then we will think about the transformative change that needs to happen. Or we might engage in this coalition, or we might join with these forces, and we might keep this bit of our politics for another time or another expression. But I think if you think about the results that approach, it's almost it's something that I certainly kind of sympathize with. It's an instinctive response to the kind of constant crisis and the constant difficulties that we face. But I think if we look at the history and the results of that approach over time, then we see a constant defensive position for the left, a constant experience of retreat where we're simply defending this, that, and the other, and we're constantly on the back foot. Reformist solutions, particularly in this period that we're in of the rollback of the welfare state that we've experienced and the constant crisis that we've experienced, reformist solutions fundamentally in this period of crisis presenting themselves as unable to make any ground on any of these points. And if we continue to take on that defensive perspective, if we continue to see, endorse that position as the left, that we'll just defend this for now, and then we'll move forward and advance our transformative expression or a real kind of revolutionary politics. It plays into and feeds into a lot of those things that we spoke about, the idea that there is no alternative, this feeling of resignation and despair, and these problems that, as we said, this disconnect between the work that we're doing all presents itself as the absence both of a transformative revolutionary vision of society, but also an organization that is able to work to make change and push forward, and to move away from a defensive position in society into a clear articulation of power and a vision of a completely different society. So I absolutely, sympathize with the practical reasons. I suppose I'm talking specifically here to those of us who are communists or revolutionary socialists, but who, for various reasons, do continue to participate in or support these kind of broader electoral initiatives. I sympathize with the feelings behind it, but I think in terms of the experiences we've had, respect, etc. We've had these things responding to the war in Iraq, responding to different things, and we've constantly kind of had the similar outcomes from it. And I think weighing it up, we see in the kind of absence there of our transformative politics. We're seeing the left in that position of defence all of the time and losing that clear articulation of power in society. And that's why I think it's important to have communist interventions that clearly break from that and that clearly articulate the politics of power, articulate the politics of transformative change in society. Okay, so I'll just finish briefly now. I've talked for quite a while, sorry. I'll just finish now by saying practically, what does a vote for us mean? We're not going to get elected. You're not going to have a communist MP. So practically, what does it mean to vote for us? Why vote for a communist? Obviously, I'm talking about us in terms of communist future. I'm also talking more broadly about other communist candidates. So in this election, more communists are standing now than there have been for 30 years. So more of you will have the opportunity to deal with the question of whether you will vote for a communist in this election or not. And obviously that intervention that we're trying to make here is to raise that platform and raise the banner of communism, to make a propaganda-based intervention that clearly shows and clearly states and raises communism as the alternative, that moves us away from that defensive association of the way that many people would associate the left as being in that defensive position, having that defensive politics. It's trying to break with that, trying to present and state clearly communism as an alternative there. Something that we have also tried to raise in our intervention is also the need for organisation, and that's organisation in terms of a communist party. And obviously that is an intervention that is more directed at specific people within the constituency who will be organising in the communities, who will be organising in the unions, and it's trying to reach those people and advance that argument. So those are the kind of two key things upon which we've stood, and two key interventions that we've tried to make through that. Practically, a vote for us allows us to have that basis to build forward. So a vote for us and a vote for other communists will give greater publicity to those ideas, give greater opportunity to raise those platforms in the media, more likely to interview people, more likely to be able to share those ideas widely. And the more we're able to share those ideas, the more opportunity we have to reach and cohere together communists within our local areas. And that's the basis on which we're trying to stand. And that's the value of voting for a communist candidate, is to try to break away from that defensive position and to try to build. And it's it's not something that, when we're in this period of crisis, is very difficult to step back from that kind of immediacy and to do this kind of patient work and to take on the tasks that require patience in terms of building and cohering together a substantial communist force in society. That's what we're trying to work to start doing. And that's what I think people should endorse, should try to be part of. If you have the opportunity to vote for or campaign for communist candidates, then I think we're doing a lot of that patient work that we need to be doing to raise communism as an alternative and to make some advance on our position as a movement and the left as a whole. Thank you very much. I'm interested to hear people's thoughts.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Kat. Yes, we did have a similar discussion before, but I think there's different people in the audience now as well, etc. So thank you for outlining your program, etc. And it's a breath of fresh air, I think, compared to many of the other programs we see, which are, mainly could be summed up as motherhood and apple pie, perhaps, if you want to be, they tend to focus on the minimal part of the program, i.e. the small reforms, etc. Your program, and that's been put in the chat as well, and I'm asking that question for myself, but also for Comrade Terry. It seems to focus on the maximum part of the program, which is socialism. What is socialism, communism, how to get there, why we reject capitalism and stuff. And I think it's, you explain it very well. You explain it very user-friendly. It's well explained, but you seem to almost ignore the concrete. It can be it looks a bit abstract, actually. I'm just wondering, if somebody's pointed this out. I know you have a position on Palestine, which you put not in the manifesto, but elsewhere. And there's, for example, nothing on Ukraine in your manifesto, which could lead to criticism that it's rather abstract, not very concrete for Manchester. I mean, you do mention Manchester, but what do you make of criticism like that?
That's absolutely, obviously, as you expressed, but it's definitely something that we've had a lot of discussions with people about locally as well. What we tried to do with the manifesto was try to kind of lay the basis and emphasize the kind of vision of communism itself. And then use that as the basis through which we could then kind of develop positions on different things. Obviously, the election was called the sort of day before our manifesto launch, so we've not really had as much work to build those positions. But I think I wouldn't see it as a kind of fully kind of catch-all program that a Communist Party might develop. We're, I suppose, directing ourselves to make a specific intervention and raise that communist platform, raise that communist vision. Obviously, a lot of it's anecdotal, but I think the engagement with communism or the interest or curiosity around communism that people are kind of expressing in this period, for me, that feels really different to how it was maybe 10 or so years ago. And I think there is opportunity to kind of make some headway on that particular point, on that particular expression of trying to raise, what is communism and how does it represent an alternative? I think, in terms of like thinking about program, I suppose to a degree we try to take the approach of, sort of older programs like the French Workers' Party, that are kind of quite minimal, I suppose. Not in terms of the, but just quite brief, I suppose. And then you can build on it through different political interventions. Something that we want to do through our campaigning is really use it to build and amplify existing workers' struggles in Manchester, existing work that people are doing. So there's really amazing stuff that people are doing in like Manchester, Greater Manchester Tenants Union, and using the kind of campaign and I suppose the platform we might receive to amplify that, rather than kind of having a quite expansive set of policies and solutions that a communist party would be able to maybe advance and develop. I don't think we have the the tool set as a small group necessarily to even maybe do that, rather than, I suppose, using, to a degree, I suppose, the way that the minimal demands would have been initially. They would have been based on existing expressions of workers' organisations and workers' movements' demands, rather than kind of imposing them from the outside. It would be about engaging with those existing demands and expressions. So yeah, it's definitely something that we've kind of discussed a lot locally. I think the main point is that we're trying to make that overarching political propagandistic intervention, and focus on, I suppose, when it comes to the more practical demands, connecting with and amplifying existing struggles and existing demands from the workers' movement.
Also, there was a question about why did you choose that constituency, because there are two relative left-wingers. Ekua Bayunu standing for the Green Party. Well, I've got issues with that, standing for the Green Party. But also that the Workers' Party has apparently quite a good local student doctor candidate. So why did you pick that one?
Yeah, we actually spent quite a while thinking about the constituency that we were going to stand in. So they've moved a lot of the boundaries around, so they've all got new names. But we talked, like, I'm from Bolton and kind of like involved, like active in my union. I'm active in kind of like community projects, and we talked about standing in, either in Bolton or in the area that covers the constituency that covers Levenshume, because there's a lot of kind of activists who people have got connections to, things like the tenants union, and trying to cohere it together with existing campaigns and make those connections. So we did spend quite a while discussing it. Ultimately, we decided on Manchester Central because of, I suppose, the propagandistic nature of the approach that we've ended up taking. I think doing a community-based campaign requires quite an extensive amount of campaigners, an extensive amount of activists to really do that in a substantial way. So we decided to do it in the central constituency because of the platform it would enable us. In terms of standing against those other candidates, I absolutely appreciate the reason that people will vote for the Workers' Party, and why people might, even vote Green in that constituency. But I suppose, as I've kind of tried to communicate, what was fundamental in why we wanted to stand was to raise communist revolutionary politics as being an alternative, as being the alternative, and trying to break with that kind of more defensive politics. So I think the Workers' Party candidate, he seems like a good activist, but I've not seen him talk about socialism. I've not seen him talk about capitalism. I've not seen him talk about class struggle. I wouldn't see that as being our politics, and I don't think communists should stand aside for those candidates. I would have probably been more concerned about standing against the CPB, for example. We did talk with them to see where they were standing, to make sure that we weren't standing against each other, because to me that seemed, I suppose, in terms of what we're trying to do, a more important question to contend with. It's not to do down why anyone would vote for Workers' Party or Green Party, but it's to differentiate the type of intervention we're trying to make.
Thanks, Kat. So we've got 4 people with their hands up. We've got about 10 minutes before, at latest, that Chris is going to join us. So I suggest I'm taking 2 questions and you answer briefly, and then 2 more. Peter and Carol were first.
Am I first or? Yeah, okay.
Please.
Yeah, thanks, Caitriona. That was interesting to hear. I was like concerned a bit, not with the ideas of communism, obviously. I mean, not obviously, you don't know me, but I would agree, that we do need to kind of get the ideas of communism out there. It's just a question of whether you know, this idea of the what they call the minimalist and maximum program that Tina's mentioned, and it's just a posh way of saying, you know, the broader issues of communist society, which we're endeavouring to bring about, and the ideas that express that, and how they're different from capitalism, and putting forward class struggle as the at the centre stage. And then the minimum is like something that you would put forward, you know the story. Now, my understanding is that if we separate the two, then we have idealism on the one hand and practical, everyday, you know, bread and butter politics on the other. And the thing that brings them together in a kind of more practical way for people who are going to vote for you, maybe, is that if you were in a party which expressed minimalist and maximum programs, and I'm just wondering, you know, there's all sorts of, you know, ambiguities that could happen. So, say the Workers' Party, and I'm not saying I agree with the Workers' Party, but I would definitely vote for them. And actually, they're standing in Clackmannanshire, Alloway, so which I'm part of here, so I'm going to vote for them because there's no other candidate. But say, for example, you know you took votes away from the Workers' Party, and they could have got elected. Now, it seems to me we're standing on each other's feet, you know, and you know you mentioned at the beginning that you kind of like you can see why people would vote for the Workers' Party. So it's not as if you could say that, well, you know, the reactionary, or maybe you do think that, I don't know, but you weren't saying that at the start. So it might have been an opportune time to establish, you know, at least a stake in the ground that's different from the Labour Party. And I'm wondering, like, from your own point of view as well, are you kind of like biting at the bit to set up a party, a communist party, so you can have a program and express those ideas through in a more organized way, you know? So I'll just leave it at that. You know?
Thanks, Peter. Carol.
Yeah, thanks very much, Tina. I know that you've been talking about not taking a defensive position, but you know, communism hasn't had a very good press, shall we say? I mean, we've had you know, Stalin. I mean, we on the left know that Stalinism is not communism, but the vast majority of people out there don't know that. So how are you going to present something much more positive to people? I think you made a very good attempt at that sort of approach. I mean, you're explaining that sort of approach, but can we have a bit more detail? What are you going to tell people that this isn't Stalinism, this isn't Taoism? That's the wrong word, I think. But people out there, the mass of people, are going to be very, very suspicious of the word communism. We on the left are not, but the mass majority are. My second question is, you talk about being a revolutionary talk about revolutionary socialism. I'd love to know how you envisage that revolution happening. How is it going to happen? How is it going to take place? And my third question is, what's your political plan? Because we all know that mass action without a political plan doesn't work. We've seen it fail in Sri Lanka very recently, for instance. So what's your political plan? Because you can't, I mean, mass action is great and you've got to build a mass party. I understand that. But if you haven't got a political plan of where you're going, it's going to fail. So those are my three questions.
Thank you. I'm going to take one more, actually, because we've got another person with their hand up. Tobias Apsi.
Right. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. The first thing I was going to say is something you'd already raised, which was the black woman from the Green Party, Equa, I think she's called. I heard her on another Zoom thing last night where the Green Party were talking about their policies on workers' rights, which actually I was quite impressed by. I mean, I'm not saying they're revolutionary communist or anything, but they're a damn sight to the left of anything the Labour Party says these days about workers' rights. But I won't get into that since the fact that she's standing has already been mentioned. But it was a sort of weird coincidence for me as somebody who's never lived in Manchester to find that there are two candidates for Manchester Central on successive evenings. But the another thing I wanted to say is I think there's a difference between the Workers' Party on the one hand and things like Tusk and, for that matter, Transform, which I assume is Left Unity more or less under another name. Now, the latter two, you might say that they're standing on left social democratic, left reformist programs. But I mean, they're programs which are clearly in the interests of immediate interests of the working class, and they are presenting themselves in their own way as socialists. Now, I won't go on at great length, but I'm basically fairly sympathetic to what they're doing. You know, they're not standing on a Marxist communist program, but they're standing on a pro-working class socialist in their own terms program, right? But the Workers' Party, as far as I'm concerned, is a red-brown party. Galloway's statements on things like abortion and homosexuality, and particularly immigration, is totally racist. He waves the Union Jack. He may be against NATO like I am. I've been against NATO all my life since I was a teenager. I want Britain out of NATO. I'd want Italy out of NATO. I want NATO to be destroyed, right? I hate American imperialism, all that sort of stuff. And yeah, okay, fine on NATO, probably fine on Gaza. I don't know the exact policies, but the you know, two Islamicists for my taste. Again, another objection, their support for religious education in schools, which I think is utterly reactionary demand. But the sort of position on immigration, on nationalism, on, you know, you might be anti-American imperialism, but you're waving the bloody Union Jack all the time. I'm sorry, I think they're a red-brown party like the DSW in Germany. And I think we should have nothing whatsoever to do with the Workers' Party. You know, whilst I would say there is a difference between voting for Transform or Tusk or for Emma Dent Code in Kensington or for Jeremy Corbyn in Islington North or any of those sort of people and voting for the Workers' Party. I would make a big distinction. One last thing on the defensive strategy. In terms of, to pick another country that's having an election at the moment, take France. I think the defensive strategy of the new Popular Front is the correct one. I mean, you've got to stop Le Pen and you've got to marginalize Macron. And the only way you can do it is that kind of unity, which I'm afraid does include the rather right-wing Social Democrats in the French Socialist Party. But I mean, I think Mélenchon is doing the right thing, and I think the NPA doing the right thing, being part of it. Okay, I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, because we can't discuss that now tonight. That would be too big a problem, an issue. I recognize, Kat, we don't have much time, but maybe you could quickly respond to those three, and then we bring two more in.
Yeah, I'll try and cover as much as I can. Yeah, absolutely. From sorry, I forget your name, the first contributor. Yeah, we shouldn't separate the minimal and maximum demands. Obviously, as I said, we've emphasised the particular intervention that we want to make in terms of raising communism as an alternative, but we have included that aspect, those immediate demands in the manifesto as well. Particularly, I think, fundamentally is the political demands that form the minimal programme, which we've tried to emphasise quite strongly, and that kind of relates a little bit to some of the questions that Carol raised as well, in terms of what that strategy looks like and how we might articulate that as being different to expressions or assumptions people might have about what communism is, and maybe fears that people might have around that. And what we've tried to emphasise in that, particularly in the political aspect of the minimal demands, is the democratic project of communism, that it needs to be a democratic fight, a democratic struggle to reconstitute aspects of the state in order to have the basis from which workers can organise to take power. So that, I think, is absolutely fundamental. I don't think you can have an expression of communism or how you see the fight for communism without having that political expression of democratic demands. So that is something that we thought was really important. And actually, obviously I come from my own political history, and others in Communist Future do, which is quite close to the CPGB, who obviously strongly raise those issues. But it's been really kind of good and valuable for us in kind of interacting with other communists as part of this project, that we've really kind of emphasised those democratic demands and that democratic aspect of the communist project that people have been really responsive to, and haven't necessarily seen that always as part of the way that we would express communist politics. And so that's been kind of a really important thing for us, and it's something that we do want to try and emphasise a lot, particularly like we're kind of working on creating a lot of social media content like videos and stuff, trying to emphasise that democratic aspect of communism. So I'll kind of keep it there, sorry, because I'll keep it brief, but yeah, thank you for your questions.
Oops, sorry, Paul is next.
Hi, yeah, thanks, Caitriona. That was really, really good, and you've won my vote. So if I was in Manchester, I'm not that far away, I'm in Liverpool, but or near Liverpool, West Lancs. But I've got a question which is similar to Carol's, which was to do with the association of communism with Stalinism. I mean, are you, if you're knocking on doors, are you getting that? Is that a response that you're getting from people? You're a bunch of authoritarian, totalitarian people, and I appreciate your answer there to emphasize democracy. But it's how do you deal with these attacks that are going to come up? It's similar to another question, which is often an attack, is that communism is a utopian idea. That it's all very nice and all very lovely, but it's contrary to human nature is one of the other ones, and the working class who demoralized to actually act as an agency, that kind of negative response. And finally, are you discussing the other groups in terms of entering? I was thinking, in terms of maybe the future, when this mass communist party comes into being, we'll be able to talk about entering other groups and winning over the best people to them. I don't know if that's something you discuss, but I suppose I'm thinking recently with the Sparts' involvement in Tusk, they seem to have that attitude. I'd be interested to know what you think about that. Thank you.
Kat, I suggest you answer that now, because Chris is about to join us in a session. Sorry, comrades, we'll have to take your other contributions after we've spoken to Chris.
Yeah, we on the question of encountering those questions about the history of communism, we kind of prepared a bit of a crib sheet of what we were kind of the main arguments we would put forward and engage with on the doorstep. And we sort of had a meeting, and most of us were saying, oh no, people are not going to say this. But yeah, people obviously do have questions around that. And I think the approach that we've tried to take is to try and deal with it honestly and engage with it in an honest way, rather than saying oh, that's nothing to do with us, forget about that. You have to account for and engage in a serious way, both with the movements that they represented, whilst also trying to emphasize the vision of communism and the struggle for communism as being both a democratic one and fundamentally based on the organisation of the working class as being central to that. So yeah, I thought we wouldn't. I thought yeah, it'd be more practical. But yeah, it's something you have to be honest about and engage with honestly, I think. Yeah.
So we're still waiting for Chris to join. So Steve, you can ask your question.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I just gone off to do something else now. I thought we'd given up on that. So let me try to be all shocked and everything. Okay, so I'm wondering, the question I kind of want to ask is, is kind of what kind of communist are you? Because now what I mean by that is, the way I see it is there are two kinds of communists. There are Republican communists and there are anarcho-communists. Now, the anarcho-communists, you might say, well, left-wing communists, as Lenin called them. What they tend to do, and so that's what I heard from you, I think, but I might be wrong on that. But what I heard from you was essentially a theoretical project. You want to go out and make general propaganda for communist ideas in general. So it appears a bit maximalist, as it were. And you want to use the election. You think it's important to stand in order to approach working people, the working class, to make general ideas about communism. So it made me think then. So then you're being questioned. Well, what kind of program are you talking about here? Are you talking about a maximum program? Are you talking about a transitional program? Are you talking about a minimum program? Because if you're a Republican communist, then you've got your minimum program is quite clear. It's Republican. And that Republican program makes you quite distinct from George Galloway, who isn't a Republican on any level that you want to name. They're not fighting for that. Eventually, for people like Galloway, Jeremy Corbyn, and all the rest of them, republicanism is a long-term goal. It's not something for now. It doesn't inform things now. So there's a danger that because maximalism sounds very left-wing sounding, then what you end up, if you're not careful, is a kind of economism. You sort of combine it and say, well, there are these economic struggles going on, basic reform. So you've sort of got a very communist future, but then a very minimal kind of struggle that you take place. Now, I'm asking this question in a way just to ask you to think about this, because I admire for what you're doing and all, and standing. It's a very hard thing to do. So I admire you for that, and it's good to do that. But I think these are questions that need to be. You kind of started to go towards it at the end when you started to talk about democracy. So I think you started to veer in that direction. So I really want to press you a little bit on that, because is it just a propaganda for communism idea? In which case, for me, and I'll finish on this point, for me, the key question in the world today, if I had to pick one, it would be Palestine. Because that is not just about Palestine, it's about what's going on in this country. Palestine has cleaved our politics in a way that we've not seen like before. So if you were talking about a class struggle approach, then Palestine must be a number one issue. And that's the thing that must come out, how we relate to that, what that's all about, and how we draw that into the working class movement. So again, you mentioned Palestine, but it didn't seem to figure prominently in what you were saying. Whereas for George Galloway and co, it is going to figure prominently in that. So George Galloway might be really doing serious Palestinian stuff, but actually attaching it to a kind of wrong kind of program, if you like, if you want to put it another way. So that's my kind of question. It's the actual struggle, which is Palestine, how we relate to that. Thank you, Tina. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Steve. I'm not sure what Chris is doing. I'm just trying to get hold of him. Ian, if you want to ask your question, go on.
It's really just a few statements. Caitriona, fully appreciate your arguments, and I agree with you. As you may or may not know, I'm a candidate member of the Communist Party of Great Britain, and maybe in a kind of minority of one within the CPGB, because I think we should actively support what you're doing. My hope is to stand as a communist candidate in the Northeast, but I'll start with the local elections, because I think in terms of the resources that I've got personally, that's what I can do. So I'm not looking at this election. I'm looking at the next local elections, and then possibly after general elections after that. But I think you're doing absolutely the right thing of standing openly as a communist. Not least of which, because I agree with one of the other contributors, the Workers' Party constitutes kind of red-brown type of politics, which, you can't be a communist and argue for immigration controls. A worker has no country. And if we're not internationalist, if we're not in favour of worldwide communism, if we're not in favour of freedom of movement, then we're not communist at all. We just, you always end up playing the numbers game. You always end up with socialism in one country or some such nonsense. And therefore, I would absolutely completely support you. I know there has been some debate between yourselves and the CPGB, and I hope you'll come to the Communist University. I'll be there for everything except the last weekend, unfortunately. And we can have that conversation in the future. But let's just remember how the Communist Party of Great Britain, the original one, came into being in the 1920s. It was an amalgamation of a whole range of different working class parties and groups and organisations, some of which were locally organised, like the South Wales Miners Federation, and others were more national. And the hope is that eventually there will be a mass communist party. But of course, for there to be a mass communist party, there has to be a mass proletariat organised for its own liberation and politicised for its own liberation. So on that cheery note, I'll step aside for Comrade Chris. Thank you. Sorry
to cut you short, Ian, and sorry, Kat, that you can't now reply to this one because Chris has arrived. Hello, thank you for joining us, Chris. I know you were out canvassing, so thank you for coming along, even if it's only briefly. Let me just introduce you because some people might have forgotten this, and it's very important to remember that Chris Williamson was the only MP who dared to stand up to the witch hunt in the Labour Party, and for that service was hounded out by the party and out of our parliament by not just Corbyn's General Secretary, Jenny Formby, but also the entire rest of the establishment in Britain. The Workers' Party is certainly vying to provide leadership today. It's made quite the splash. It's very ambitious. It's not managed to put quite forward the 500 candidates it was planning on, but 154, which is still pretty much very decent, more than the rest of the left together. And I want to introduce you with some good points because we already spoken about you without you being there, and people were quite critical, as I'm sure you can imagine. There were very good points about the Workers' Party. I think we should be honest about that. There's the question of Palestine. I think the way George Galloway put that at the top of the agenda is very, very good. But, and this is also in response to some of what we've discussed tonight, it takes the question of the democratic deficit in this country quite seriously, which is also not something that we see across much of the left. The need for absolute free speech, fight against the monarchy, putting a referendum forward, I think they are suggesting. Yesterday's press conference was a hoot when Telegraph lady tried to say it's inappropriate to talk about monarchy when king and princess are suffering from cancer, and George Galloway was brilliant answering her, telling her they don't give a hoot about normal people who've got cancer, etc., etc. But there are other points in the program which are more problematic, and we hope to discuss these briefly with you. From a socialist communist point of view, perhaps there's a focus on the nation state, or as George likes to call it, make Britain great again, as he said in the press conference. There's a position that many would describe as perhaps anti-immigration, making a distinction between immigrants and refugees. I should say, though, before people get their knickers in a twist, some of the more controversial issues like trans rights and abortions are not in the manifesto. Keep that in mind. Don't charge Chris with that. So, Chris, thank you for joining us. Why should we vote for you and the Workers' Party? How do you envisage your prospects and the party's prospects? Do you really expect a handful of MPs to make it, as George Galloway said yesterday?
I really think we've got a chance of doing so, Tina. Obviously, it's difficult in a first-past-the-post electoral system, but the level of support that we're getting in a number of constituencies really does put us in a very strong position, I think, to secure double figures, actually, in terms of the number of MPs. I think that we have a real potential of returning. Yes, we were hoping to get a lot more candidates over the line, but we are still a relatively small acorn. There's been a big surge to the Workers' Party since George's stunning by-election victory in Rochdale. But as I think any new organisation will experience when you come up against the kind of bureaucracy, particularly new political party, and the bureaucracy of getting the nomination forms filled in appropriately and submitting them on time, it can be a bit of a challenge when you haven't got that infrastructure in place all over the country. Having said that, it is a good total that we've secured, 154. And as I say, I think we're in a strong position in a number of constituencies to get over the line. In my own constituency in Derby North, frankly, Tina, it's the best support I've ever known in any campaign, better than in 2017 when I won the seat for Labour with a significant majority. Bear in mind, I only won it by 613 in 2010, then lost it by 41 in 2015 and won it back with a majority of well over 2,000. But the support is really, really strong. It's almost too good to be true. Whether this kind of translates into votes on the day remains to be seen, but there is a very strong sense of injustice in terms of what's happening in Palestine right now. There's very strong support from the Muslim community in particular, but there is good support from the Sikh community too, and really the community right across the piece. Frankly, I've only had two people who were unpleasant to me on the doorstep, which is very, very unusual. And one of them wasn't, it was just basically a plague on all your houses. As one guy said, not supporting me because he said I was a communist. But apart from that, everybody else has been incredibly polite, and the vast majority very, very supportive and keen to, get behind and vote for me. So, I'm quite hopeful that that we're going to do well in Derby South. But obviously, the proof will be in the pudding when the election comes on July the 4th.
Great. And we've talked about this. I mentioned this already. The more controversial issues. Let's talk about it, because I know you're not scared of an argument. And I think in the free speech issue in the program, I think applies to the rest of the left as well. We should have these free speeches. So in Rochdale, when George Galloway was standing in the by-election, at least, he put out a couple of statements, a couple of leaflets. One was on Palestine, and one was sort of encapsulated perhaps his more what he calls himself as a conservative, socially conservative views. Now these are his own views. I think that's perfectly all right. But he put this out as the Workers' Party. Sort of against abortion, against sort of gay marriage, against trans issues. Sorry, it wasn't against gay marriage. It was trans rights. Everything comes in pairs. He called it. So what happens in a situation like that? You have a leaflet which goes out as Workers' Party. Does it come to the rest of the Workers' Party, to the leadership? You're a what are you, co-leader? I think it's called.
Don't you?
Yeah.
Well, look,
is that approved by the party? That kind of stuff.
Yeah, these are George's own personal views, and people are entitled to their own personal views. And George has never made any secret of his views. When he was a member of the Labour Party, he had those self-same views. George is a practicing Catholic. I'm what you might call an atheist Catholic. I was brought up a Catholic, but I'm no longer a believer in that sense. And, there's space for people to have these personal views within the party, and then that's perfectly acceptable. And I think in an election, it's quite also reasonable for somebody to tell the people, what their personal views are. But, look, George has made it very, very clear that he would die in a ditch to defend anybody who was at risk of violence or discrimination. And his record, I think, speaks for itself. And he did indeed, let's remember, get a Stonewall Award for his support for gay rights, back at the time when there was things like, Section 28 was discriminating against gay people and so on. So, look, George is, he's not a homophobic individual. He's not somebody who, wants to discriminate against anybody. He's always stood up for minorities. But, he has these personal views in relation to the things that kids are taught in schools and so on. He's himself acknowledged that he is a socially conservative. I'm more of a social liberal, but there's space for both of us inside the Workers' Party, because the key thing that we focus on is economic inequality and class politics. And that's what I think the left has lost over the last sort of 40 or 50 years, and we've got obsessed with identity politics. And identity politics doesn't pose any threat to the establishment. And that's why you see the likes of Raytheon and Lockheed Martin and BAE Systems, joining in pride marches. You've got Boris Johnson claiming to have the most diverse cabinet in history because he happened to have more black and brown faces and more women around the cabinet table. But it wasn't a diverse cabinet at all. It represented the 0.1% of the population that represented the interests of the wealthy elites. And, we put front and center of our politics that commitment to fighting economic inequality and promoting, that sense of class politics, and let's not get obsessed with identity politics. I mean, look, on LGBTQ rights, I mean, that battle has been won, hasn't it? I mean, gay liberation has been achieved. Why are we obsessing about this when, we've got 14 million people living in poverty, over 14 million people living in poverty? We're on the precipice of a potential third world war, catastrophic third world war. We're seeing a genocide taking place before our very eyes in real time on our smartphones and on laptops, etc. in Gaza.
No, I hear what you said. Women's rights.
We've got a proxy war going on in Ukraine as well, and that's something else we've spoken out against very, very forcibly too. So these are the things I think that we should be focused on. That's not to say that some of these other issues aren't unimportant. They are important. But when you prioritize them as the most important thing, and you then ignore and relegate the issue of class politics, which most of the left has done, let's be honest about it, then I think we're in the situation which has led to the way in which the trade unions have atrophied, where the left has lost its way, where we're seeing this grotesque levels of inequality and poverty in our country, and that's because the left has been asleep at the wheel.
I mean, I do think, there's the women's rights, gay rights, trans rights are constantly have to be rewon. I mean, officially on paper, women have the same rights as men, having a daughter, being a single mom. I know that's not the case. There is discrimination going on, and there's also threats on abortion rights. I mean, that is constantly has to be defended. The same with trans rights. These are constantly trying to, attack us again. So, I mean, let me put this to you. His now quite infamous interview with Novara Media on, where he said a few times gay relationships are not normal, in the sense it's not, a woman and a man, so it's not normal in terms of reproducing, etc. Is that I mean, he volunteered those views. I watched the interview. It was very strange. He wasn't pressed on it at all. He volunteered these issues. Is there an attempt perhaps to keep people like me, like pesky lefties who might ask questions like that out of the Workers' Party? What is the key audience of the Workers' Party? It's not the revolutionary left. I don't think he wants us in the Workers' Party, does he?
What about George? The Workers' Party is more than George Galloway. The Workers' Party is made up of thousands of people. George is obviously the leader and is a very strong individual, and probably, as I've said on many occasions, the best orator in the world. And it's great to have George on your side rather than against you in that sense. But look, we represent the working class. We seek to represent, anyway, the working class. That's the cohort that we're keen to bring into the Workers' Party, because the working class have been badly let down, it seems to me, by the left. And that's why we've got so many people now, and as I've already mentioned, in living in poverty and in precarious employment. I mean, look, Tina, funny if I was making this point to some of the people on the doorstep this evening, because people are really fed up with the political class. I mean, that's pretty clear. I mean, sometimes people see a politician coming down the path and they're not sure who you are. They say, "Oh, I don't want to talk to you." And then when we say, "Well, I understand where you're coming from. We're not the mainstream political parties. We recognise that they've let people down." We want to build a movement, a party that actually represents the interests of the working class. It stands up for working class people, that is opposed to war and wants to stop arms sales to Israel to commit a genocide. But the point I've been making to some of the people is that, when I left school in Derby in 1972, full employment was a thing. And there was about 120,000 people working in manufacturing jobs in Derby at that time. Now, it wasn't perfect, of course. There were many, many issues. Strong trade unions as well, of course. But the thing that it was a kind of guarantee, really, that you knew that you were going to have a better standard of living, a better quality of life than your parents did. You know, people could aspire to buy their own home. Working class people could aspire to buy their own home. And if they didn't want to buy, or they didn't have quite enough money to set aside to put down for the deposit, they could easily get a council house. I mean, it's very difficult to get a council house now. It's almost impossible to buy a home for working class people in large parts of the country anyway. And I mean, I know Derby's not the most expensive, but I gave a little anecdote a few years back, actually. Now I'm thinking about it, it's about 10 years ago, actually, when I made a speech in the House of Commons talking about my own personal experience as an apprentice bricklayer in 1976, where I was able, me and my girlfriend who went on to become a wife, working class lass who was a telephonist at the council. I was, as I say, an apprentice bricklayer. We were able to buy a brand new 3-bedroom semi-detached house backing onto a waterfront in a desirable village, and it was only 3 times what I was earning. Those days are long, long gone. And we want to kind of get back to a situation where working class people can realistically aspire to own their own home, or if they don't want to buy, to be able to access a council house. A lot of my contemporaries who didn't necessarily buy, I was, you know, a slight rarity. I mean, it wasn't that unusual for teenagers to become homeowners back in the 1970s, but it wasn't that common either. Many people did, however, in their 20s manage to get on the housing ladder, but many others decided that they would just live in a council house, get a council house. So you could just go down to the council and say, I'm getting married in a few months, or I'm leaving home, you know, can you put my name down? And within literally weeks or a couple of 3 months, they would have a house or a flat. Those days are long gone. That's the sort of thing that we need to get back to. And the other thing, Tina, we are pushing on is the fact that local authorities now have the powers at their disposal right now, made possible, ironically, by the Tories, because there's no cap on the housing revenue account, to eliminate the housing crisis. Why aren't they doing it? They are not doing it. And it's an outrage. And they could buy off the open market, they could build, and of course, then that would generate jobs as well as tackling a social need. So that's clearly a really important issue for us, to eliminate the housing crisis, to certainly eliminate street homelessness, but to go considerably further than that. We want to eliminate poverty. We're the 6th biggest economy in the world, Tina, aren't we? I mean, these are the things that we should be really addressing. And, you know, you're making the point about, you know, we have to constantly re-win the rights that we've won. And I take your point to some extent, but if you lose your way, or you take your eye off the ball in terms of, you know, economic inequality, class poverty, that then, you know, has that negative consequential impact on some of those other rights that you are talking about. So that's why I think that you know, they are much more central and much more important than the identity politics, which much of the left has been obsessed with, you know, for, you know, best part of 40 or 50 years.
I think you have to do both. Obviously, you have to fight for. You know,
no, I'm not saying you don't do both, but I think if you need to prioritise, though, Tina, and what the left has done, or much of the left has done, they prioritised identity politics over class politics and economic inequality.
Not a fan of identity politics. I do kind of agree with you on that. I don't agree with that. We shouldn't, you know, we should take the sides of all oppressed people, I think, and that's a problem I see there, that it's.
So we're on the same page, Tina. You're not disagreeing with me. You're on the same page as me then, and the Workers' Party. We don't disagree.
Not really. No. I think you have to. Trans people are clearly oppressed in this society, as are gay people and stuff. You know, so you have to fight for them without buying. You can do that without buying into ID politics.
Who said that we want to discriminate against trans people? George has never said
that. I don't think you take their struggles seriously. I don't think you put their struggles as, you know, on top of your agenda as you do. No, the question of.
Well, because I think there are much more important issues.
Well, if you're a trans person and you're trying to live your life.
You're sidetracked on trans rights, and you'll lose a lot of the working class by doing that, you know.
Well, it depends on how you fight for it, doesn't it?
I don't think, you know, by focusing on trans rights in that way and putting it, you know, front and centre, it's actually doing that community, if you like, any favours at all, because it just pisses people off. You know, and particularly when you've got a situation where so many people are really struggling, as I've already said, struggling to put food on the table, struggling to keep a roof over their head, worried about losing their job. I mean, we nearly lost the rail industry yet again in Derby. I led the campaign to save the rail industry 13 years ago in Derby, and we were back going around that same thing again. Luckily, the new contractors come in.
You could say, though, you could argue the same case, like the monarchy. Who's talking about the monarchy? Nobody is. Well, the Workers' Party is. You can choose government and walk at the same time, including.
Well, hang on, Tina, you sound like the Momentum characters who used to go on about.
Don't say that.
Well, that's what they used to say, Tina. And when they used to say you can be pro-Palestine and actually not be anti-Semitic and support Israel at the same time, chew gum and walk, it's bullshit. But look, there is a much more important issue at stake here, I think, isn't there? A much more important principle when we're talking about the monarchy and those reserved powers and so on that they wield, and the fact that they are, the acme of class inequality, aren't they? So, I don't think there is any analogy at all or any comparison really to suggest that somehow, well, it's not really, an important issue and so we shouldn't be focusing on it. I think it is a very important issue, actually, because it goes to the heart of class politics in this country, it seems to me. And it's not just about the monarchy, the king and the queen. It's all the kind of stuff that goes with it, isn't it? Including the House of Lords. I think George was making that point in his response to the question from the...
And very well.
Yeah.
Very well as well. So let me, before I bring some comments in from the floor, then I must ask you about this, the question on migration, immigration. And I'm going to quote to you now what George Galloway said yesterday in a press conference. He said yesterday, 822 people in small boats were stopped in the Channel, but there were no boats from the Royal Navy around who could have stopped them. They were threatening other people rather than defend our own country. We want to give people a national patriotic purpose and make Britain great again. I mentioned that already. I mean, this is now goes to what it says in the program as well. There's in the subject on refugees, it does say we want to make investments in border security, including heightened seagoing and coastal patrols, etc., to keep migrants out. And this is, of course, the key issue why the Workers' Party is being called a sort of red-brown party by many. Is it really the job of socialists to pick and choose who's allowed to come into this country and who's supposed to stay out? And in the Workers' Party's program, it says useful migrations. They're allowed to come in, but when it comes to refugees, etc., we have to increase, more Navy boats to keep these people out. Is that actually what you agree with?
Well, I think that's a bit of a caricature of the Workers' Party's position, actually, Tina. I think we need to acknowledge that the capitalist class, if you like, have used migrant labour to depress wages. I think that is a fact. And that's why trade unionisation and so on and organising workers is so crucially important. But the key thing, I think, in relation to the issue of migration that the Workers' Party has been very explicit about in its programme is that we want to stop the reason why people seek refuge in the first place. And the reason why often people are seeking refuge is because of the imperialist wars that Britain and the West are responsible for, and the ruthless exploitation that these global capitalist corporations are inflicting on those countries. The self-same capitalist corporations that are ruthlessly exploiting, maybe to a slightly lesser extent, but ruthlessly exploiting workers in this country. And the thing that I always say to people on the doorstep when they cite the problem, it's the bloody migrants that's the main problem. I always say to people, look, mate, that ain't your problem. You're looking in the wrong direction there. It's not your neighbour that's the problem. What you need to do is look upwards. Look at the people that are actually responsible for, as I've just mentioned, the wars and the exploitation. The same people that are causing difficulties for working class people in this country. And what I say to people when they come out with that is, mate, what you need to be doing, you need to be linking arms with those people, with migrants and so on that are here, to fight against the common enemy. The common enemy isn't those people. It's as I say, it's the capitalist system, and that goes down. I think it starts people kind of thinking about it. And look, and nobody's been stronger in supporting minority communities in this country than George Galloway. I mean, his record.
You were
again,
against the Navy boats being sent out to stop migrants. I'm talking here now, you know, I'm not talking in the future when we've stopped imperialist wars, etc. But
No,
now,
but-
and
Well,
now
I think what George is making a point there, I think, that what this country is doing is that we are engaged in these imperialist adventures. And, you know, we're sending, you know, the Royal Navy into the South China Seas and so on. We're sending reconnaissance flights over Gaza, etc. You know, the priorities are all completely skewed and completely wrong. And I think that's the kind of point that he's trying to make there. But to somehow suggest that George is in any way some sort of you know, bigot or racist, I think is a completely unfair caricature of a man who has spent his life standing up for minorities and indeed put his personal safety, indeed his life, on the line in actually, you know, fighting apartheid in South Africa when he was.
I don't think he's a racist. No.
No, but I mean, you know, people often don't, you know, give credit to George for, you know, what he's done in his life. I mean, as I've said, or I was about to say, you know, working for the as an undercover operator for the African National Congress in apartheid South Africa, breaking the siege of Gaza. You know, and he's obviously his record in, I mean, not necessarily putting his life at risk, but he certainly did on those two endeavors. But the way he stood out against the illegal war in Iraq, you know, was really inspirational. So, you know, I think people should give George credit for that. And what I would say is as well, I mean, I know some people disagree. I mean, I don't agree with everything that every position that George takes. But as I've said, you know, we're a big enough party to allow those kind of differences in you know, in particularly in relation to, you know, their kind of social outlook in that sense. But as I've often said, you probably heard me say this in the past, Tina, as well, that what we should be doing on the left is focusing on where we agree. And let's agree to agree where we agree and have fraternal disagreements where we don't. And look, on about 80% of the issues we're going to agree on. We. So why are we focusing on where we disagree? You know, why is all the attention? Oh, well, George said this about abortion. Not that George has ever made his, you know, his views a secret in relation to abortion. You know, I mean, George has said X, Y, and Z about trans rights, etc. You know, why are we focusing on that when we've got, as I've said, we're on the potentiality of a catastrophic third world war and a genocide in Gaza. Millions of people, 40 million people in poverty in this country, precarious employment now endemic throughout the land. We've got a housing crisis, people sleeping on the street, people begging on the street. These are the things that we should be focused on as a left.
Sure.
And
we should also try to press people's side.
There's a book I would recommend to anybody who is watching this evening, if you've not already read it. It's called The Death of the Left by Steve Hall and Simon Winlow. And you know, that traces, you know, where the left has sort of started to go wrong, and this sort of obsession with identity politics, which has been, I think, very, very damaging.
George has been volunteering his views, it has to be said as well, though. So he puts them out as well, doesn't he, in order to have a bit of debate on it. So I don't think he minds. I mean, he would mind having a debate on this issue that we disagree on. And clearly, you have some differences.
No, true, Tina. But the emphasis has been, and the focus has been this evening, for example, on these relatively kind of like minor areas of disagreement. Why are we kind of like uniting and saying, yeah, let's get together and fight for a socialist vision for the country? Let's prioritize class politics. Let's prioritize economic inequality. Isn't it an absolute outrage that we've got so many millions of people in precarious employment and living in poverty, and our National Health Service is kind of on its knees? My agent, actually, just as a little anecdote, an aside, Tina, was involved in a very, very nasty accident last week, a head-on collision. Thankfully, he's okay, or he was injured, but nothing, no broken bones or anything. But his car's completely written off. Fatality, some young kids are basically joyriders. One kid was killed. The other two were very seriously injured. Sammy's got a very big car, you know, so the whole front end was totally destroyed, wiped out. I mean, it's unbelievable that he actually survived it, to be honest with you. And in a smaller car, he would have died, I'm sure. He had to wait an hour and a half for an ambulance. He was on the roadside in agony. An hour and a half. And then when they got to the hospital, they had to wait another 2 hours, I think he said it was, 2.5 hours, before they could find a bed for him. I mean, these are the things that should be focusing on, isn't it? And I know we all kind of agree on that. So why are we talking about that instead of You know,
But
what instead of talking about what George said, X, Y, and Z about trans
But
rights.
it is, I mean, the migration issue is a big thing in the manifesto, and he volunteered it yesterday at the press conference. He started with that against Farage, etc. Why he's different from Farage, because he's compared with him.
The difference, though, isn't it, Tina, that we're talking about is let's stop the reason why people are seeking refuge. And he does make the point,
Sure,
which is a
but in the here and now, there are refugees
I know
coming.
that, but it's a valid point, though, isn't it? That people, you know, highly skilled clinicians and so on, from other, you know, developing countries coming here is denuding those nations.
Sure. But as long as they want to come, you know, who's for you to say you can't come because you're not useful to our capitalism, you know?
I'm with you on that. But it is an issue that we should be addressing. And if we just kind of close our eyes to this and just say, well, yeah, just keep coming and don't actually address the reason why, that's, you know, because we want to see, you know, international world development in that sense, so that, you know, people aren't necessarily seeking or wanting to find a better life. Who wants to leave their home at the end of the day? Who in reality would want to uproot and go to a strange land? And particularly where you've got, you know, the kind of bigotry which we're seeing, you know, on the rise now with the likes of Farage and all the rest of it. I mean, you know, but there would be no stronger champion fighting for those people against that bigotry than the Workers' Party and George Galloway.
Unless they send Navy ships. Anyway, I'll stop on this one now because there are people who want to come in. Thank you, Chris. Comrades, please keep it brief. Chris can't stay that long. Couple of minutes each, please. Ian, and I'm going to take a few and then back to Chris.
Personally, I'll be voting Workers' Party at the general election. Why? Because in Spennymoor and Newton Aycliffe, we have a Workers' Party candidate standing against what is clearly a Labour Party NEC placeman. However, the Workers' Party candidate described himself as a former soldier and turned businessman. Every other respect, he seems reasonably good, especially on Gaza. He is of Middle Eastern extraction. So I'll be voting for him, and with the greatest of pleasure. And on a personal note, I hope you do very well in Derby, Chris. But the problem I have with a party which claims to want to turn to class politics is when you start to effectively then talk about immigration as a feature that we have to kind of go along with a populist line on. Yes, the bourgeoisie has always used immigrant labour to undermine workers' wages, the competition for scarce jobs and housing. Not racism necessarily is what motivates people. But on the other hand, as socialists, as communists, what we would be in favour of is saying, let these people work straight away and let them join trade unions, and let's prevent any kind of discrimination against them. If communism isn't internationalist, it's not communism at all. It's not socialism at all. And the danger is that all the Workers' Party will do is end up being a bit like a kind of Labour Party 2.0, a socialist Labour Party like Scargill's Socialist Labour Party. And in the end, you'll be up against exactly the same problems in terms of trying to make capitalism work better. But with a left-wing tinge, and of course you will be undermined immediately by the ruling class, and without the working class there to bolster you as a revolutionary force, not just in Britain but worldwide, then you'll be a lost cause, or just another blind alley, and that's my problem with the Workers' Party. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Harry was next. Keep it brief, please, comrade.
I'll try, Tina. You know, Chris was talking there about the 80%, which is basically the 80% we all agree with. And I'm sure that if I read the manifestos of, Communist Future, the Workers' Party, I would say I probably would agree with 80%, maybe even 90%. Why don't I join them? Well, probably for the same reason. Why don't they join the Socialist Party or Socialist Labour Network or WIN or Left Horizon or any of these groups? Because many ways we would do the same thing. Well, there's two reasons. One, I mean, I was involved with Left Horizon since it began. I left them. Very clear reason why I left them. They became completely reformist, completely parliamentarian, getting a vote for Labour, kick out the Tories, and basically a left reformist programme, parliamentary road. I left them because if I had stayed with them, and adopted their position, I would be, in my opinion, miseducating the working class. It's the wrong way to do. That's why I left them. The other reason is to mention what Steve raised there, and it is in reference to the Communist Party, and it is the national question. Big question, of course, here in Ireland. We know all about that. The Communist Party position here is a completely nationalist position on that question. Socialist issues, I would probably agree. Nationalist question, complete division of the working class here on that question. And that's the position in Ireland. They split over Scotland on the same issue, nationalist question. So that's a fundamental reason why I would not become part of those particular two parties. The point I'm trying to get across here is that in these elections, and it's basically all of the parties, they're going out to the people, to the electorate. There's our position. Come and join us. Join us, join us, join us. Socialist Party, Liberalism. We have, in fact, a very popular party, People Before Profit here, and it's join us. This is, to me, what we're doing wrong. We're not engaging in the struggle. We should not be getting them to join us. We should be intervening in the struggle. And that's the mistake that we're not making. The consciousness of the working class where it is today. Now, electorally, the consciousness is certainly getting rid of the Conservative Party, get them out of power, but not as many people as position get Labour Party, and what's the alternative? There is no parliamentary road. We need to organise the working class. I'll leave you in this point. I know you're going to be pressurising me, Tina. Take the issue of Palestine. Mass demonstrations all over the world, in your country and in my country. What is now? The parties have got involved, and there's various parties involved in it. Same thing. Hey, this is our party. We're organising for the protest. There is nothing of them intervening and progressing that struggle now in the way forward. On the platforms, how do we progress? No discussions. How do we progress the struggle? October 7 changed the lives of working class people right throughout the world. They've seen their governments. And that struggle, the working class, where do we move forward in the struggle? And no one is giving it. Where we move forward.
Sorry, I want to bring in other people as well. Apologies.
I know. All right. Well,
sorry.
I got the point.
Thank you, Harry. Matthew, 2 minutes if you can, please.
Yeah, okay. I'll try and make 3 points very briefly. I mean, there was, as a demonstration, there was, I'm sitting here in Glasgow, about somewhere over a mile away from where I am now. 3 years ago, there was the famous events in Kenmure Street in Pollock Shields, in which the citizens of this town correctly turned out by their thousands and stopped the Home Office deporting people. Correct. I mean, an absolutely exemplary action in preventing that vicious efforts by the Home Office. That was then denounced by George Galloway, and he denounced the Scottish government for refusing to assist the Home Office in deporting the two men. Which, I mean, it's just, to me, that's absolutely scandalous. It's racist. The second point for me is the nature of the problem we've got in terms of fighting the actual the economics is the issue of the unions, and I don't think it's necessarily even just straightforward. The unions are inadequate, which they are, but it's also about politically how do you generate a political organisation which is capable of fighting. Now, this year, of course, is the 40th anniversary of the miners' strike, which some of us took part in, and which we lost, as we all know. And the problem is, of course, nobody actually took the lessons from that. Said, okay, well, how do we make sure we actually win? And the thing is, it's been backwards ever since. And this is the problem, you see. I mean, it's actually, how do you actually win these big class battles? And this is the problem. It's not a question of, the inadequacies of the unions. It is a question of the inadequacies of the left. I think the final point is nationalism. Anybody now has to be an internationalist. You cannot, it's not possible to have an autarky. No country can operate even by itself. The working class has to operate internationally. It cannot do anything else. And therefore nationalist notions like make Britain great again are actually an obstacle. We absolutely fight against this. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Gina, I need to be I've got another thing I've got to do at 9 o'clock, so I'm sort of up against the clock a bit. So yeah.
You want to quickly reply, and then we let you go. Sorry, comrades.
Okay, so, yeah, I mean, what I would briefly say then is just in terms of what Harry and Ian were saying. I mean, they're kind of making the perfect the enemy of the good. You know, I think we are making progress. Then it seems to me the Workers' Party has captured the zeitgeist of where a lot of working class people are at, and people are rallying to us. I mean, it's all very well saying we've got to mobilise the working class, and we can talk in forums like this. But the truth of it is, it's only the Workers' Party that's really kind of mobilised a substantial number of people, and it looks like we're going to get a reasonable return at the election, and that's a base to build on, it seems to me. And rather than having highfalutin esoteric discussions about the revolution at some point in time, and maintaining socialist purity, which I think sometimes some on the left tend to focus on. I think it's sometimes being getting your hands dirty and acknowledging where people are at. I mean, and I can't remember whether it was Ian or Harry talked about being a populist. I don't think there's anything wrong with being populist, actually. I mean, being left-wing populism is a good thing, it seems to me. It's trying to kind of mobilise people to a particular point of view, isn't it? And so I don't think we shouldn't see it necessarily as the dirty word that some people seem to do. On the issue of deportations, I mean, I think I applauded that action, what those demonstrators did to stop those deportations taking place. And indeed, I put a statement out, albeit only on social media, saying that was the the epitome of solidarity. So I absolutely do support actions like that. But to say that you can't have a national perspective, I think we have to be internationalists. I mean, I don't think it's fair to say that the Workers' Party isn't internationalist. I mean, we have a very clear position. I mean, the clause 1 of our 10-point program is all about anti-imperialism. You can't get much more internationalist, it seems to me, than that. But we do live in a nation state. And people do relate to that, and I think we need to actually work with people where people are at, where working class people are at now. I mean, look at the football today and the way in which that raises sort of passions and so on. And I think by if we don't actually acknowledge that, then I think that's how you end up losing people, and you don't actually win people over to your cause. And so we can have conversations in discrete groups, but it's not really building a mass movement. And so I just think the criticisms of George in particular have been unfair. George isn't the Workers' Party; he's the leader of the Workers' Party, but it's much more than that. And people are within the Workers' Party, as I've already said, are entitled to their own personal views. And George has never made any secret of his social conservatism, going back many, many years. And it would be dishonest of him, I think, to try and disguise that now. And just to come back to that point that I started with in the conclusion there is don't make the perfect the enemy of the good. We are making progress, it seems to me, with the Workers' Party. We are, mobilising people, many people who don't normally vote at all. So we're giving people an outlet, and there's an opportunity then, isn't there, to actually, when you kind of grab people in that sense, when you've got people, you've got then the chance to start that political education, to start raising political consciousness, which is so important. I agree. But first of all, you've got to get access to people. And I think the Workers' Party is best placed at the moment to actually do that. We're demonstrating that with the way in which George won that by-election in Rochdale, and the numbers that have rallied to us since then. And we'll see what happens in the general election. But I think if we can get a number of MPs returned to the House, we will be the real opposition in the House of Commons, and I think that will be a great, rallying point for many people in the country. So I would urge people on the call today, to rather than focusing on those areas where you might disagree with what George has said, that doesn't necessarily mean it's party policy as social conservatism isn't kind of party policy in that sense. But to actually work with us, and if you can't feel you can't join us, but at least work with us and collaborate with us. We're doing that. We're working with. We've indeed endorsed a number of independents around the around the country, and that's the way forward. You know, we have to work, it seems to me, collaboratively in that sense to actually make any real difference and to make any real cut through in terms of building success in the movement and you know, winning for the working class, which is what I think all of us on the call would want to see us actually achieving.
Thank you very much, Chris.
I've got to shoot for this other thing now. I've got to be there in 5 minutes, and it's a 10-minute drive.
Oh God, looking forward to you challenging the policy on migration and that of the Workers' Party. Thank you very much, Chris. We'll let you go now.
Yeah, thanks a lot for inviting us, Tina. Good luck.
We'll finish the meeting though. We can have other comrades make their point. William, Steve, and then back to Kat. Thanks, comrade. William, sorry we couldn't bring you in when Chris was still there, but please do make your point.
It's a shame. I'm obviously not going to be voting in this election because I don't live in Britain. But I think the biggest problem that we have in Ireland.
I can hardly hear you. I think your microphone.
Sorry, I think. Can you hear me now?
Yes, better. Thank you.
Right. No, we're dreading the fact that there's going to be a massive Labour Party majority in the House of Commons, because as far as we're concerned, the British Labour Party is more so than even the Conservative Party, British imperialism in action. And that's what they are. If Starmer himself was in Ireland, where he was in the Director of Public Prosecutions in Belfast, now he's lots of things. There's people in jail, innocent people in jail, that he prosecuted through his agency, and they're still in jail. So we don't expect, we would actually got a fairer deal of the Tories, always of the Tories, than we did of the Labour Party. The Labour Party, at the very beginning, looked for the execution of the 1916 leaders, asked for it in the House of Commons. Later on, the H-Block Armagh situation was brought about because of the Labour Party. It was the Labour Party that done away with political status. Now, there's people here complaining about nationalism. They're doing it. If you were on the receiving end of an imperialism, you would resist it and you would be accused of being a nationalist. But in actual fact, Irish nationalism was the beacon for a lot of other colonial oppressed people for the fight. So I'm not ashamed to say I'm an Irish nationalist. And if I wasn't an Irish nationalist, I wouldn't be an internationalist, right? So you can't be an imperialist internationalist. And you can be an imperialist if you come from Britain without even knowing you're one. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you, William. Steve, quick second bite of the cherry. And now, again, you couldn't address Chris, unfortunately.
Yeah, Julian Assange and somebody else, Starmer, had a hand in keeping in jail as well. We just like to mention that. Yeah, I would support, because I think Palestine is the most important issue. Yes, I would vote. I don't know if I've got a Workers' Party candidate in where I am, and I would have voted for Chris, and I would vote for Workers' Party candidates. All I'd look at, you know, what their actual record was, I guess. I think that the problem is, well, okay, I agree with Chris that because of the nature of the crisis that we're in at the present moment in time, there needs to be, just as there's a right-wing populist party called Reform, and that is a gateway to fascism, they will gather the forces together around Reform that will eventually become the basis of a fascist movement. But I think the same applies on the left, which is a kind of mirror image, that communists should be part of a left populist party, and that's a gateway drug to communism. Now, the communists can go off in their own little bolt hole if they want. I know that the CPGB didn't do that, because when there were various attempts at left populism, they always joined in with it. But they never tried to lead it. They always left the reformists lead it, which was always a big problem. So that's not entirely fair, because in the Socialist Alliance, they did try to get, did try to have a leading role. But that's the problem, that the communists are just going off to make communist sects. Well, that's not going to help us at all. The problem with Galloway's party is its program. Its program is wrong. and basically because they've not recognised the terrible state this country is in. We are in a state of complete and utter degeneration. The two-party system is dying, and any attempt to restore the 1945 social monarchy, which all the left populists have done so far, and that's when you look at the 10 points of the George Galloway Party programme, all it is really is restoring the 1945 social settlement. You cannot do that in the present situation without there being a radical democratic change. That is a precondition for any social change in this country. And being anti-monarchist is not the same as being a Republican, George, if you were here. Anybody can be anti-monarchist, many people are. Being a Republican is something rather different to that. The final point is this. I think it's right to say, and I think you acknowledge this, Tina, that a party, we shouldn't equate a party with a leader. A leader could have a different line to the party. The key thing is the party. The key thing is the programme, what the programme and the party says or doesn't say. And Galloway could be, we don't want leaders to be personality cults. So everything comes out of George Galloway's mouth is the politics of the Workers' Party. So I think Chris defended that idea. You can condemn Galloway's social conservatism, but it isn't necessarily the policy of the Workers' Party unless the Workers' Party programme says that. A party is a collective.
It was on leaflets.
Yeah, well, in that case, it's become the official party. If he puts it on leaflets and he says it's the Workers' Party when it's his views,
yep,
right? Then that's a violation of party democracy. Really,
I thought that was a problem in Rochdale.
Yeah, that's right. He's made it his personal view and not the view of the party, and that's absolutely right. He's become a personality at that point. He's become a personality cult by doing that, Tina. In a way, I really agree on that.
I wonder, Kat, if, in summing up, we could maybe focus on something that Steve just said at the end, because I profoundly disagree with this idea that we should work towards a populist party, which sounds popular, doesn't it? But in reality, it means you have an easygoing program that doesn't talk about the tough bits, I believe. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, thank you in general. The discussion's been really interesting, and sorry that I won't be able to kind of capture it all, but I think obviously that is one of the fundamental kind of questions facing us at the moment, because I suppose relating to what Carol raised earlier in terms of how do we advance this project, and obviously as myself and others have kind of raised, for us, that project is trying to move towards and trying to lay the basis of and build a mass communist party. I suppose people might disagree and might have different conceptions of how that's going to come about. And I don't know if in kind of expressing that, Steve would see that kind of approach as maybe being something that could lay the basis of that party, or whether he thinks that we can kind of use a populist party as the vehicle for that. Obviously, as you kind of identify, the CPGB has done work within those organisations as part of the kind of strategy towards such a communist party. I think there's massive problems with a lot of the ways that the left approaches that, and I guess, you know, some of it's expressed in what Chris was talking about. Well, we kind of agree on these ideas, can we just kind of put the other bit to one side and just sort of get around the bits that we agree on? The bits that we disagree on are pretty fundamental in terms of a revolutionary strategy. The Workers' Party doesn't express a strategy of class struggle. It doesn't express a strategy or a perspective of transformatory change. It doesn't mean that people can't vote as communists, vote for it or support it or campaign for them or whatever it might be. But if we're talking about the you know, if you want to call it the 20% difference there, that's pretty significant in terms of the project that we're talking about. And communists might find ways and means to work within those forces, but it has to be from the perspective of trying to build that party. And I think obviously there's been efforts to work within these formations and express those politics and try to, polemicize against those within the left that might kind of say, okay, well, let's keep quiet about this 20%, or let's put that to one side. And I think that there can be value in doing that, but we can't mistake that for imagining that a populist vehicle can be the means by which a communist project itself can come into being, I think. But yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. I think that's a really good point to make. I mean, there is, if it exists, if the struggle throws up an organization like that, a left populist, then of course communists have a duty to engage with it. But to fight for the setting up of one another, that is what we're pursuing, would be the wrong strategy. I totally agree with that. Really interesting discussion tonight. Thank you everybody for joining. It was a bit disjointed with Chris being so busy with his election campaign. I hope it helped some people to decide how to vote, but more importantly, to think about the future beyond this election. It's much more important, is it what happens after July the 4th and how our forces are going to be organized or not. There will probably be left-wing organizations springing up. Another one, Collective, probably will be the vehicle that much of the left supports. I see that Tusk has now signed up to it as well. And probably George Galloway might be joining it. So that will present us exactly with that problem. How do we engage with it? It's not going to be what we want, but it provides a pond for communists perhaps to advance their ideas. And that's probably where a lot of us are going to end up then, and perhaps fighting on the same side. Thank you very much, Kat. Thank you very much, comrades, for a really interesting discussion. See you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.